name's Keith Darty, and today we're processing some live oak beams for my house. These were milled on our sawmill, and these are being hand distressed for my home application. These are going to be structural beams that are going to support weight, so we're leaving them solid. I have a series of these that I've done from a faux beam perspective. Logan, you can kind of pan over those. These are examples of faux beams that we've done. These are actually made out of pine. So for me, you know, working with pine and using finished lumber, it provides a better surface to more quickly create these faux beams and have more of a finished feel and look to them. That way when I go to finish them, there's not a whole lot of labor that actually goes into sanding down hand-hewn beams. So I wanted to do these quick. I wanted to have more of a furniture finish. So I made these out of pine, and then I hand distressed these and finished these as well. Now this has a high-end furniture finish on them, multiple coats of lacquer, multiple sanding applications to get to this level of finish, which we can also do with the white oak. It just takes a little bit more time, and it's a little bit more labor intensive because we're working with raw lumber versus finished lumber. I'm gonna stop now, and I'm gonna stop sanding on these. And I'm going to go over to this raw beam that I've been working on to kind of take you through the process of what we do to get it from that state to this sanded state, which again is more smooth, and once you sand it down, it has more of a weathered finish look to it. So when we do stain it and add the first coat of finish to it, whenever we go to sand down that first coat of finish where all the little hairs raise up, and then you sand that down and then you coat it again. So again, it's multiple applications of sanding, multiple applications of lacquer. So, but we'll get to that in a minute. Let's go back over here to this raw beam, and I'll kind of show you what I did to get to that point. So. Yep. All right, so for this particular application, I spent a lot of time figuring out how we could properly distress these, but still have it fairly automated and easy to do. This is white oak is very hard and dense wood, so it took some figuring out on how we could actually distress these to make it look relatively hand-hewn. So what I discovered is that you can take a handheld router or a handheld planer and you crank the bit where it's all the way out as far as it can go, and then basically you just go to town. Well, as you can see, there's no rhyme or reason to it. Just go to town, whatever feels right. That's the first step in getting this look. Now, when it comes to this, again, you have to be aggressive. It's very dense wood, so you can kind of see some of the ones that I've already done, but just pick a spot that looks like it might need some attention and just and then I take the hatchet and just kind of scrape out some of the loose pieces. That's good. Doesn't have to be perfect. That's good. And one thing to note, the reason that I'm creating these long runs with the planer, so if you think about a hand-hewn beam and its life cycle as it gets distressed, you think about people who are using these beams and they're pulling them along the ground, they're pulling them along rocks, or out in the forest, they're building their buildings. And these beams have been pulled over various terrains, so the long runs in them, I think, gives it more of that realistic, live, rustic feel, as well as the chops that you would get from a hand-hewn perspective. So all the tools you need is a hatchet and a handheld planer and a sander for the final finishing. From a hand-hewn beam perspective, you want to pay particular attention to the edges, because I don't think there's probably any hand-hewn beam that has a perfectly square sharp corner. And if it does, it's probably by chance. So always be thinking as you're processing these beams, you know, how would it look, you know, how would the natural look be from a worn down, you know, 20, 30, 40-year-old beam? Its life cycle, everything that it's been through from the process of erecting and tearing it down and repurposing it. So make sure you're paying particular attention to the edges, because the edges need to look worn, they need to look rounded, they need to look rustic. And I think that's probably one of the biggest components of creating a rustic beam, is to just make sure you have a really great level of attention to detail so it looks as realistic as possible.
Okay.
Ready? Okay. So I wanted to talk about the sanding process a little bit. So there's probably at least 2 stages of sanding for these beams, because they're pretty raw and they're pretty they're dense. So what we like to do is we like to take it down using, you know, 50 to 80 grit sandpaper. It could be 100, all depending upon what the beam looks like. But we want to finish it off with 220. So we get it down to this. It's still relatively smooth. But before we stain it, we want as much of the grain and much of the fuzz removed as possible, so it doesn't absorb the stain. We want the stain to go as deep as possible into the wood. So what we're going to do is we're going to sand it down again on this beam. We don't have to be as thorough as we did with the 50 or the 80 or the 100, but we're still going to go and do a second sanding to get it to a 220 smoothness before we stain it and before we put the first coat of lacquer on it. So that's what we're going to do right now. We're going to use 220. We're going to resand the beam all over, all again, and then it will be ready to take stain.
Mm-hmm.